Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Thursday, February 27th. Derek VanRiper, Sarris, Trevor May, all here with you on this episode. We're going to take a look at some new pitches that have been introduced this spring. We've got some interesting research that's been done on the value of veteran or starting pitchers going deeper into games. We'll talk about that impact that has on several teams that have been maybe leaning more heavily on their starters. We always have the veteran presence versus veteran presence question. That's going to be talked about a little bit today as well. And of course, if you've been watching games, you've noticed that ABS is in play this spring. So we'll talk about some of the early feedback on the ABS system getting some usage at the major league level here this spring. Some news and notes as we get started today, gentlemen. Kyle Finnegan is back with the Nationals right on time. We had our NL East preview a couple of days ago, talked about the other options in the bullpen that might emerge to get saves, and within hours, Kyle Finnegan reunited with the Nationals for a slightly discounted price compared to what he would have made if they hadn't non-tendered him a few months back. So fun on the business side. But as far as the Nats bullpen goes, do you just pencil him in as their closer again, Is Kyle Finnegan 25 saves going right down on your spreadsheet?
Yeah, I think there's no real reason to, make somebody like Jose Ferrer more expensive in arbitration, from a cynical standpoint and from a team building standpoint. I think there's some value in that guy was the closer last year. You already screwed with him. The rest of the players are going to notice that to some extent. You just cut your closer and sign him back again. But yeah, I think there's Trevor can maybe speak to this more, but there's a pecking order in the bullpen, and he's the guy, until he loses it.
Yeah, I agree. I think that he never lost the closing role. It wasn't a performance thing. At least in terms of blown saves, he got the job done quite a bit. And I know a lot of peripheral stats don't look amazing, but it'll be just his job to lose, I'm sure. But it won't feel as, going in maybe last spring training, he was like, I'm the closer. And this year he's probably like, I'm the closer, but right, not feeling super confident in my role in this, because they were willing to just be like, all right, go on. And then they're like, oh, you're cheaper, and bring it back. So yeah, not a great feeling, but I know that overall he's probably just like, I'm happy to have a job, and at least I know this place is familiar, and I know that role is open for me, and I can go take it. So maybe next year if it happens again, something else happens. I have a better opportunity.
Weird situation, but yeah, I think we have a little more clarity now on the pecking order in that Nats bullpen with Finnegan going back there. I did see a note that Shohei Ohtani is closing in on his spring debut, which really bodes just well for everyone who enjoys watching him. But I think there are some people out there who are worried that the shoulder injury he suffered in the postseason last year is going to be more of a problem than everyone has let on up to this point. But this looks like everything's going just fine. If anything was still bothering Shohei Ohtani, Trevor, he wouldn't be playing in games at the end of February and beginning of March.
Yeah, it's the Dodgers too. They are very, very cognizant of this stuff. They don't push things. Guys take their time, get healthy, get right. When they come back, they want them to be back and back for good. So that's a good sign. I think they're one of the more cautious teams in terms of that stuff, especially with a guy they're giving $700 million. So if everyone feels good, top to bottom of that organization, about his ability to play and where he is on his timeline and where he could be in a month, then I mean, if there's any group of people that I would trust the most for these things, it's them. And then he's also Shohei Ohtani. So I just refuse to be surprised by anything he does. For him not to be bothered with something like it never happened wouldn't surprise me. Obviously, that's diminishing returns over time. You can only do that so many times. But guy's a freak. So I mean, if you said, oh yeah, he's back from his shoulder in 2 weeks, that wouldn't surprise me. So it's just one of those things. He's of course he's back.
Yeah, he's scheduled to play Friday as the DH in their spring game against the Angels. And I think by all accounts, he's supposed to DH and be ready to go for that season opening series against the Cubs in Tokyo.
The one thing I would point out, is that series in Tokyo does weird things to your camp. So I'm not suggesting that they're pushing Ohtani because their opening day is earlier, but I think you will see their starting pitchers are going to have, earlier ramp ups I would guarantee that the press people in Cubs and Dodgers camps are totally stressed out, because what you do in spring is you take these pictures for whatever like Sony's in town for the MLB The Show pictures, and they actually do like full head scans now, I think, where they like kind of scan your whole body to put you in the game, and like there's all these extra things that happen in spring that you have to get out of the way. And if you have a full spring, you're just like, oh yeah, okay, on Tuesday I'm doing this, Thursday I gotta go kiss some babies, that sort of stuff. It's like all this, like it's almost like a politician in town. Like you have these little events you have to do. The spring is full of all these things, but if you have to be in Japan playing before everybody else is ready, you have to squish all that into less time. I just know that Padres camp last year, everybody was really stressed out. And so I'm not suggesting that's going to be relevant for Ohtani, but I think you will see the starting pitchers that are going to pitch in that series are going to have their second, like their 3-inning start earlier than other people. They're going to, they're going to have to be on a slightly different timeline.
Yeah, I did also see a note that Roki Sasaki had a 3-inning simulated game against the White Sox on Tuesday.
That's sort of what I'm talking about right there. Like that's a lot of innings for somebody. You're like, why is he doing 3 innings already?
Yeah, 38 pitches, only 4 swings and misses, according to Bill Plunkett, who was on hand to see that, or got a report at least about it. So Roki is supposed to start the second game of that 2-game series against the Cubs. I imagine this is an easier adjustment year 2 of starting early for the Dodgers than it is for the Cubs, who are not experienced in doing this, right? Like the Dodgers have their template in place. Trevor, of all this stuff, the kissing babies, getting your body scanned for MLB The Show, what's of that stuff, what was actually fun? Like the extra stuff you had to do during spring. Was there anything you really enjoyed or thought, hey, this is actually kind of a unique or cool thing that I get to be a part of that you didn't even think about when you were coming up?
The face scan stuff was pretty cool. That was like that rig too. It's like 50 cameras or whatever that are all in a big globe around you, so it just slowly like turns you and takes all your photos. I thought that was cool, and it's something you don't normally do. But yeah, there's not a lot. That's super fun. Also, real quick, I want to touch a point you just made about Roki Sasaki. I want to give some context for that because I've had this said about me before. When you throw a sim game, the chances that guys are just standing there tracking pitches are high. So like. For getting 4 swings and misses, there might have been like 8 total swings. So, but then again, he's throwing it against another team, a young team that probably swung a lot. Which also, if guys are swinging at every single pitch, they're just fouling stuff off constantly. They wouldn't even swing out before. So, take that with a grain of salt. Anyway, back to the other question. Yeah, it was like interesting, cool stuff like that. When the Twins, like my last year with the Twins, they had they kind of rolled out a new marketing idea. So they brought in a new company that did like music videos and commercials for a living. So they had all these they had a bunch of really cool like different types of like intro stuff to do. Like they put you on a spinning thing and they let you wear whatever you wanted, and like you didn't have to like be in uniform, and so you could get it, and then they would send you all the stuff too. So like as someone who did lots of social media stuff, I was like, this is great. Like this was I would never do this, and it was interesting. Guys were like milling around, like watching.
That's
what
I'm talking about. It's you're recording like intros, like all those like intros when you're watching MLB Network or whatever.
Yeah, like the spin intros around, and you look at the camera, and you're fake throwing and all that kind of stuff. That's the normal stuff.
And Topps has to come to town too, right? Like Topps is taking pictures too, and
usually media day, like Topps has someone there, or they have like a freelancer there that takes the photos for Topps, and then so like they kind of spread everybody out. Yeah, the media days, especially for like the Mets, had tons of it. So it was just a huge tent. They had to put like a portable out there because there were so many people, and it's like 50 stations. That gets, even for me, I was just like, okay, I've taken the same photo 15 times. I think you should share with each other. But I mean, other than that, like parties that like they would do like parties at breweries for team parties and stuff. Lots of guys love that. Go play cornhole. I was like, nah, I just want to be at home sleeping.
I'm going to see a lot of you guys.
Yeah, we're going to hang out a lot. I think we're good. But yeah, a lot of guys golf, and like there's tons of that stuff. It wasn't my cup, but a lot of guys like that stuff.
Yeah, tons of golf this time of year.
Every event's a golf event.
You get
Every-
if you're a
every
veteran,
event.
you can get that like 3 or 4 p.m. tea time because you can like you leave in the fifth inning or whatever.
Yeah, or you leave in when the game starts. A lot of guys.
Yeah, just leave right when the game starts. No big deal. Did see a quick follow-up on Bryce Harper. He got hit by a pitch. Took the bus trip to Dunedin, which I think was going to be maybe his only road trip of the spring anyway. Gets hit by a pitch, leaves early, but he's fine. It's like a bruise on his triceps. So just saw that.
This
first
is
note.
why I never take the bus in spring.
This is why we'll never go to Dunedin again. Hey, any reason's a good enough reason to avoid the bus trips in Florida. They seem pretty miserable by all accounts. Let's talk about
Drivers in Florida are insane.
I mean,
scary.
at least you don't have to drive yourself.
That's true.
You're probably in the bigger vehicle.
Right.
Yeah.
Probably. Want to get you guys' thoughts on some of the early responses to the automated balls and strike system. All right, we got ABS this spring. I did see a Jason Stark piece about it where a lot of teams are telling pitchers not to challenge, which I think is kind of funny. How do you feel about that, Trevor? Like, do you want your catcher to challenge for you, or do you want to just make that call yourself?
It's funny when I made a rehab appearance for against Salt Lake in 2023, and I told the catcher, "Hey, you do it," because I don't know what the strike zone is because it's been adjusted and recalibrated, and it is a little bit different. A lot of guys are like, "Actually, I'll give you the power to do it through spring and try to like figure out what I'm seeing and if that translates into a real strike or not." Because even if you were pretty well calibrated in, you tend to give yourself the benefit of the doubt anyways. So if it's changing and you're missing high strikes or whatever, usually I'm like, the catcher knows a little bit better than me, because I'll be honest, I've gotten situations a lot in the past. A guy who did it to me constantly I called it getting Nido'd, Tomas Nido behind the plate. Like, he would make me get really mad about a call, and it was like 4 inches off the plate. But he's just such a good receiver that he got me too.
You're seeing the
some
glove
of the
move.
yeah, I'm like falling off to the side, and he's pulling it back so well that like it looks like I have the angle and I don't. And then I go watch again. I'm like, oh my God, I'm so embarrassed for getting mad at CB for that. He wasn't wrong this time. So it's like, I think there's a lot of veteran guys who are like, you know what? Let me figure this out. And a good way to do it, I still want to use it, but I want to take your lead, especially if it's a younger catcher who's dealt with it before. So I think the younger guys are more comfortable doing it.
Closer to strikes.
They usually know better. Yeah. They usually know, usually go and be like, was that there? And they'll tell you straight up if it was or not.
They don't have any ego in it either, right? Like, you as an ego.
It's not them.
I hit that spot.
If you're mad and they are mad, then you're really confident that you're right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, maybe you have to just it's a two-step thing. If you're both like, yeah, let's go, let's challenge this, then you
and I think that's what it is.
Win.
You ask, should we? And then it's the pitchers are like, boom, right away, that you should be watching. Because that's happened a couple times. Some young guys just did it. Like, the ball was in the air. They're like, immediately. And then wrong.
And then there's Max Scherzer, of course.
Yeah.
Not at all surprised Max Scherzer wants to call his own challenges.
Yeah.
I was watching the Guardians play the Brewers, and Carlos Santana, who had the first challenge in Major League Guardians history, and won it. I think it was like the first pitch that he saw was like, psh, challenge. And he's got a really good sense of the plate, and he knows what he's talking about most of the time. But what was interesting was the first one he got right, the second one he got wrong. The one I saw he got wrong, and he was like, okay, and he stood back in, and he's kind of like this professional, so he's not kind of smiling and joking a lot. Like, he was just like, no, I'm right. Oh, I'm not. Okay, and then he stood back in. There was not a lot of like sort of emotion around it. It was just like, here, I think I'm, oh, okay. But the second one, I think, was Lane Thomas, and it might have been like the next at bat. So, and then Lane Thomas is a little bit more, has a little bit more sort of affect. And so he was laughing about it as he was doing it. And it was, I think, maybe laughing about like, oh, we're just going to challenge it until we had no challenges left, sort of idea. Like, oh yeah, I'm going to go for it, And he was joking with the umpire. And the umpire and him had an interaction, but they were smiling. And I don't think it was like Cheshire Cat smiling. I think they were kind of laughing, where it was like Lane said something like, oh, I'm going to push my luck. Here we go, And umpire probably said something like, well, you were wrong last time, so let's see what they say, And Lane Thomas was correct. And there wasn't a lot of like, I don't know. I thought I thought, and they showed a little bit about the dugout kind of being like, kind of like, what's about to happen? Strike! Oh no! So like there was, I don't know. I thought it could be spring and they're just joking around and nothing matters, but it looked like no one was like that. It actually almost could take the temperature down a second between the hitters and the umpires, right? Like it's like now, if you have an argument, you can be like, well, challenge it.
Yeah, give recourse. I think that's
like maybe we have like less
water on the flames.
Yeah, could we have some fewer arguments? Like challenge it or don't. Like let's not just be bitching at each other all the time. Like challenge it or don't. That's the sort of vibe I got, and that could be a positive. I don't know. We want more smiles.
So tempers flaring less often, managers being ejected less frequently. Maybe that could be good. But okay, like the implementation of this in games that count. How close are we to actually having that? Because I think from the perspective of people who've seen games in the minor leagues where it's been implemented, for coaches, players, people have been involved, I think generally it's like pretty well received. But the problem seems to be more about how you define the strike zone, right? Is that going to be the last piece in making this happen and become a reality? Because I think the mechanics of it, it's quick. I think you're right to talk about the way it could diffuse some of the tension. That's probably a good thing over the course of a long season, especially. But Trevor, is the problem kind of something you alluded to earlier, that the zone is just not the same as the zone everyone's used to? Like, is that the big sticking point on this?
Yeah, but just like the pitch clock was something that a bunch of guys who played for a long time weren't used to. And so, I mean, getting used to it, I think is entirely possible. I think that it just can't, there has to be a standard set in place where it can be learned and then it can't be changed constantly. And that's one scary thing, because right now there really isn't guidelines. You can't find them. You have to just ask people, and it's in test mode. So it's kind of like the fluidity of that stuff is kind of built in. And that's why I think people are hesitant to like really get committed to a version of it now, because if, for example, if the zone shrinks or gets wider or changes what guys have to, like how they contextually from their angle see the pitches and then have to make decisions, doing that too much or having it change periodically could completely unravel. Like guys, having a challenge system doesn't matter if no one knows what to challenge, because they don't know where the edges are. That is one thing. I think that's why it's been so slow to be rolled out, honestly, is because it is different from place to place, and it's done through Hawkeye in a lot of ways. The ways they get that information, the way they calibrate it is different. Position of the sensors is different in every park. So they're figuring out how to make this as standard as humanly possible, so it's hyper consistent, or as consistent as it can be, which that trust we were just talking about, where it kind of diffuses situations, it kind of goes away when everyone's mad at the same thing. At least you're mad together, I guess.
What's
right? If you had to
tell us what it is,
you see the expected home runs by park. Like if you had that counter going across the bottom, you're like, oh, that would have been a strike here, but it would have been ball there. Like that'd be bad. Like
yeah.
that would cause a lot of problems and frustration.
There are so many engineers that work on StatCast, and I actually think the engineering parts, I think they can figure this out. They're kind of unsung heroes, and I think that has been part of why the rollout's been lower. But there's been something else going on, which is that there was a huge explosion in strikeouts and walks when they implemented ABS and AAA, and that had to do with the actual way the strike zone was implemented. So what Trevor was talking about in terms of the definition of what the zone was. And then at some point they tried to change it, because they were like, oh, let's make it more like sideways and less high, and like let's like take, because there's all these high swinging strikes, let's pull that down, and we want fewer strikeouts, and I'm not sure how much of that was transmitted to umpires, players, like fans. Like I don't know. Maybe in the minor leagues you don't have to, because it's not about winning. It's not as about fans in the same way. But in the major leagues, I think transparency would have to be part of this, where it's like there has to be like a definition of the strike zone, maybe in sort of mathematical terms, like very sort of specific mathematical terms. With like, we don't even know. We were talking about this earlier. If a ball hits, like, the corner, like what does the corner look like? Is the corner like a corner like this, and
Is
if
it 90
any
degrees?
part of the ball, if any part of the ball touches any part of that corner, is it a strike? Or is it more of a rounded corner? Because those are implications. So, like, I think a lot of this has to be really transparent. And if they change it, I think they have to tell us the changes as fans, as writers, as umpires, even if it's an ABS thing. And some of that makes me uncomfortable. It is giving more power to Manfred and co, where if they don't do it transparently, we're going to spend every spring doing the same thing we used to do with the ball, where it's like, what strike zone is it this year? What ball is it this year? Even with ABS, there'll be this sense of like, we don't know what it is. And so he would have to tell, I think teams would have to know what the strike zone is, and players would have to know what the strike zone is. And if they are doing all that, they have to be super transparent about it and probably just announce this is the strike zone that is going to be in the challenge system. Last part is they're struggling with what to show on TV, because the TV box is not necessarily the same as the Savant box, as like the one that's going to be the challenge system. So if there's a box on TV and then they challenge it and the ball is like a strike by Savant, but a ball by the TV box, that'll make people angry, and so they also don't want cheating. They don't want people watching the game on TV with the box and then telling them challenge, we got the box. So the box on TV might go away. That's something that I think Jason Stark was reporting. And I'm okay with that because I think the box on TV is not necessarily, since it's not the box that they're being judged on, it's a false sense of security. Like, oh, that was a strike or that was a ball, when you actually don't know. It's just it's the broadcast company making a strike zone for you, and so they're talking about like, maybe they'll do strike zone probabilities, like a sort of a soft strike zone map that's not like has hard edges. It's more like these are where strikes are usually, or maybe just the corners. So they're still figuring out how to show it on TV. And I think they also need to figure out transparency so that we don't feel that Rob Manfred can just twiddle the knobs every offseason and screw some part of the population, the high strike people or the low strike people or whatever it is.
I think it would just be shrinking the zone to increase offense based on past things the league has done to manipulate
screw pitchers
outcomes. Yeah,
of course.
Seems to be the most
given,
likely.
Guys.
Yeah, it's an automatic.
Yeah.
We know.
It needs to be harder. Very clearly.
Yeah.
Yeah, pitching in the big leagues, not hard enough. Come on. What are you talking about? The other thing we're watching really closely this spring are the new pitches that we're seeing. We talked last week about some hopeful developments, things we'd like to see pitchers add, but now we've gone through about a week's worth of spring games. Just about everybody's had a chance to pitch in a game. You might not see it on video, but there are new pitches being rolled out. And I wanted to ask you guys, what new pitches have been popping for you in the early days of the Cactus League and Grapefruit League schedules? How about you, Trevor? What pitches is kind of like opening your eyes as one that could be a really impactful offering this year?
Well, everyone keeps asking me on all the other things that places I am, like what's going to be the new, hot pitch that everyone's trying to design this year, because we've had a new one every year for like the last three, or sinkers coming back or whatever, and we're kind of running out of pitches. Like we're gonna have to go back around the circle at some point, but there is a new one, and it is another version of a splitter / an off-speed pitch, a changeup, the kick change, which one thing that's super interesting to me and will be all year is how many guys are implementing the kick change because they weren't able to do a seam shifted change, and they weren't able to do a straight change, and they haven't learned a splitter because of other complications. So when I was coming through the professional baseball ranks and just in general, like guys trying to learn changeups was like everybody, like anyone who didn't come into pro ball with one, like learning one in pro ball, it was rare that anyone found a good one later. It has something to do with comfortability and grips and throwing hard, and what hard throwing guys struggle to get a velo changes and all this kind of stuff. And now we're seeing more options for changeups. So my exciting one is Clay Holmes's kick change, because one, he's going from relieving to starting, which a bunch of guys have seen success these days. And The thing's gross. Like it's good. It's real good. He's already got a crazy
righty on righty too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Look at this swing. Look at this swing again. Zach Short, no chance here. Oof.
And the velocity's 90.
Like, no.
And it's one of those things like now there's these off speed pitches that aren't they're movement based. Like I asked Jason Adam in an interview once, like because he's throwing 94, 95, and then he's throwing a 90, 91 mile an hour changeup. And I'm like, you use that as a movement pitch. It's almost like a sinker. He's like, yeah, the velo is kind of makes it funky because it's like not way slower, but it's also not close enough either to be the same swing path. So like guys have to make decisions, and he uses it constantly, like kind of a sinker, and he uses it for movement. And
Can you tell me something though, Trevor?
Kick change is for that.
Look at this. How can you throw this 80 plus miles an hour? What the?
I do not know.
Well, we're looking at bird songs, right? I'll throw this in the Discord later, but it's like we're looking at bird song kick change. What you're doing is it's like a knuckle curve, I guess. But is there a flick there?
Yeah, it's a flick
finger.
So you're kicking it. It's called a kick change because you're basically. The problem with pitches like this is, and even like breaking balls, is there's sometimes the spike curveball, for example, the spike is to get your finger out of the way because when it's on the ball,
like you're not doing anything with that finger. You're trying to get it away. So you're just like
you're trying to get it away.
Way to get out. Yeah,
this is a way to get it out. So the spike gets it out of the way so it doesn't kick the ball off axis. This is they're actually putting that finger up because it kicks the ball off axis, and they want that because if it were flat, it would be super straight, and they can't get it to move. So by kicking it off axis, it's like it's about to start spinning in a certain way, and then that finger hitting it last is what like gently kicks it off and slows the spin down, and so it kind of spins funky. And it's for guys who are natural, really heavy supinators. I actually saw an interview that Clay did where he talked about how he grips it and how he throws it and how he thinks about it. He's a crazy his like. If you look at the spin axis on a sinker, it looks like a slider. It's like tumbling over itself. It's spinning so oddly that it goes the opposite way. It's like a backup slider at 97. He's figured out a way to get the exact same spin and movement on a changeup that he wasn't able to do because it's just a different finger you're using for the pressure.
So thinking? So he's thinking flick at the end. It's like I'm gonna throw. I'm gonna do my whole throw, and at the very end, I'm just gonna flick.
So it's just like you extend your finger right at the end, so it is the last finger that touches it, and it just kicks it off of the spin axis.
I guess that's possible.
Yeah, and for some guys they get it immediately, and that's because when they tried to throw their changeup before, that finger kept getting in the way, and so now they found a way to make it be in the way on purpose. Like that's what they're trying to do, as opposed to trying to avoid it. And that's literally how everybody is learning their pitches now. They're like, oh, naturally, your finger's always in the way. Let's see if there's a grip that can make you get the motion you want with that finger being in the way. And the kick change is the new iteration of the changeup that's doing that. A lot of guys are really, really liking it.
Yeah, you can see it on Davis Martin, Hayden Birdsong, and now Clay Holmes. And Clay Holmes also debuted. He threw the four seam in the postseason. We already sort of spotted that. But he debuted a cutter as well. So now he's got 3 hard pitches, 3 soft pitches. I mean, it's a pretty wide starter's arsenal.
Also, Andres Munoz is also throwing one, which will be really fun to watch.
What? That's going to be at like 90 or something.
That's going to be gross.
Like 94.
Trevor, Clay Holmes has been so heavily a 2-pitch guy for so long in the Yankees bullpen. How many guys in short relief have that feel and that ability to add a third or a fourth pitch the way Holmes is doing in this transition back into starting? Is this a quarter of short relievers, half? Like we've been talking about this now for more than a year because it seems like teams are more open-minded to moving guys back into the rotation than they were even 5 or 10 years ago. But how many guys actually could do it?
I think there's more that could do it than you would think. I think that you're getting experienced pitching and you just happen to be in a role where it's simplified enough to where you only have to throw 2 pitches that then you're now comfortable enough on how you get guys out that you can then start adding pitches. Like you have a process. And I think that's what we're seeing. Like with Seth Lugo, same thing. Like he has a starter process he always had. Now he just needed to be put in the position. But like him being a reliever for so long, I think made him a better starter. And then it comes down to getting a feel for a pitch. So if you find a third pitch immediately, which by all accounts, Clay literally picked this up like the first day they showed it to him. He was like, oh, that feels really good because it looks like a sinker. It feels like a sinker to him. It looks exactly the same in his eye.
Wow.
So it's it feels very like comfortable. And once you get that, then there's no reason you can't do it. So then you know how to set guys up. You know how to get through get guys out the one time and then move on to the next guy. That's how you thought. So I think we're seeing this happen more and more. Like even at the end of my career, in my last year, I threw the most pitches since I was a starter as a closer. My last year, I threw 4 pitches. Could I have started with that stuff? I think that I could have been put back to starter. I just would have lost my velo and not thrown as hard, and then felt bad, and then had a little bit different mindset, had to figure it out. But like I could have done it. I feel like I could have because and your command gets better. So like I think there are a lot of options. It's just whether or not you want to take that chance. And I think that like Aroldis Chapman trying to do it for a long time. They tried to bounce guys around like this a lot for it, especially like the aughts and the late 2010s. We're like, this is never working. Let's just put them out to the pen. And now we're finding with pitch design the way it is, we're finding more options to get guys out of the high leverage roles into starting again.
More tweaks that can be made, and I think that's it's exciting, right? I mean, and the kick change sounds like it's the hot honey. Like hot honey's everywhere now. Like the kick change is the hot
all
honey.
Honey's hot. It's like
it's the only kind of honey that's out there right now. You were writing about some new pitches this spring, so you can pick your favorite for the purposes of illustrating one on the show. I mean, what's caught your eye so far this spring?
Well, I talked about Clay because what you can see with his new pitches is that he's kind of broadened the shapes, like he's changed, and the four seam doesn't have to be great. I think this is our new understanding. An early understanding was like, oh, four seam IVB need it, and so you would talk to Clay Holmes and be like, dude, I'm sorry, you get like 16, 17 IVB, that's no bueno, dude. That's not good enough. And then you're like, wait. They're sitting on the sinker because you throw the sinker all the time, and your sinker has like 7 IVB or whatever. So it's like, is 10 IVB over your sinker good? Yeah, that actually is. If you compare it to other sort of four-seam sinker combinations, that's a huge difference. And so even I was talking to Adam Ottavino about this. Ottavino's, this is a great example. Ottavino's four-seam doesn't have great IVB, but it has more IVB than his sinker, and they see that slot and they expect sinker, and they also know Adam Ottavino, sinker, and so just getting something that isn't the sinker that has 4 or 5 inches more ride is like, oh, okay, that's totally different, and that's going to be surprising. So that's something we actually tried to account for in this newest version of the stuff model. But anyway, I wrote about Holmes. I wanted to give a name that is a little bit into modern pitch design as well, and from a different angle. So I was just talking about four-seamers that are better than expected sinkers. David Festa throws from an overhand angle. This is not a guy I wrote about, but he throws from an overhand angle, and he's adding a sinker. So again, this is not the most beautiful sinker you've ever seen. It's not a Clay Holmes sinker. It's just a sinker.
It's a Dylan Bundy sinker.
It's what?
It's a Dylan Bundy sinker.
Yeah.
Over the top supinated, or the pronated sinker, which you just don't see.
Yeah, and I think and like Brian Hayes hits it hard, but it's 96. And here's what I think on top of the movement profile. Look at where Festa threw his four seam and slider to righties last year. Four seam, I guess the middle when he needs a strike, right? But usually high middle for swinging strikes. And then slider obviously has pretty good command, and he puts it on the outside corner like he would. He's doing nothing on the inside corner. I mean, like on the inside third of the plate, like the hitter doesn't have to honor that at all. And that's where the sinker will go. And that's where the sinker went in the clip. And that's the other part of, not only is it different movement than your four seam, but it's going to be thrown to different places. And then he can also even play with a high sinker. He could do a play off it where they think they're getting the high four seam, they get the high sinker, and that saws their bat off. So, just having multiple hard offerings, I think it's like an old school trend. And probably by the time that, since we're noticing it right now, out there, it's probably every team is trying to do it, but some teams are better at it than others. And I think the Twins are sort of jumping onto this one now, where they're adding fastballs. And so, we're going to see many more sinkers and cutters over the next few years as teams are like, you can't just throw one hard pitch. I think that's something we want for Grayson Rodriguez. Like a sinker would be good for him. The sweeper might really help him, but he only throws one hard pitch. Anybody who throws one hard pitch, you might find the results on that hard pitch are worse than like a stuff model would project or that you expect, because they can at least be like, I can keyhole your hard pitch. If it's hard coming out of your hand, I know how it's going to move, and I probably know where it's going. If you're just a four-seam guy and it's hard out of the hand, that's a high thing, and I know what to do about it,
I mean, I think the location on that fastball, like, that's part of the problem for David Festa last year. Opponent slugged 544 on that pitch. Middle.
That's a lot of middle.
You're cooking in the middle. He was cooking in the middle of the zone, and it's 94.7. It's not 97 miles an hour, 98 miles an hour. You can get away with that more often. So I think that's part of it. So
and if you can throw the sinker to the same middle location and the movement brings it out of middle, that might help him too.
It's at least a small adjustment that'll make the four-seamer a little more effective, but the ultimate tweak would probably also be elevating the four-seamer more consistently, right? Like you can't live in that part of the strike zone. Like the two-seamer guaranteed helps, but also throw the four-seamer higher.
Yeah.
It was a video that I could not find. Count this among the non-existent pitch changes so far. But Max Meyer, and I think it's kind of interesting because I saw this note that he touched like 97 with his fastball. I remember last year, his first appearance back from injuries against the Yankees happened to be the game that was on TV. He looked really good. People got excited about Max Meyer, former first-round pick, finally healthy again. I get it. It kind of sounds like he's making multiple adjustments, though, right? Taking the slider, kind of add drop on the slider, and then making a sweeper adjustment too. So having two really good breaking balls. And then, I think the other tweak is improving the changeup. And I was reading about this. There was an MLB.com story. They were using TrackMan and doing all the things teams do, pitch design and shape, to just reconfigure the whole arsenal for Meyer because he was so heavily dependent upon two pitches. And I thought it was interesting only because we talked to Bill Hiesel, the director of pitching for the Marlins, back during the winter meetings, and they have raw talent, and they've done pretty well historically with pitching in Miami. Some of it's the ballpark, some of it's player development they've had in the past too. But all this is to say, it's like Max Meyer, he's going into the season with a lot of confidence after kind of reading this story. Like he says, all of his pitches feel like they're the best pitch in his arsenal right now. I was like, well, that's good. Like that's good as long as you can actually execute them in games. But it just seems like the problems he had last year was just relying way too heavily on two pitches, right? And at least splitting up the slider to go sweeper slider and getting some more drop, that's probably going to go a long way towards making him more effective as he tries to stick as a starter in 2025.
Yeah, I think one of the good sort of foundational things is, he can spin it. And that can be, I think, a separational thing for people is, he was having some trouble putting an arsenal around it, but there are plenty of players who have long, big league careers in the pen or in the rotation where their best facet is spinning it. Like we watched Kyle Bradish try to figure it out around that slider, and then he did. Once you have that elite breaking ball, I think it's a question of sort of shaping an arsenal around it. And sometimes it takes a little while if your fastball's a little dead zoney or you can't throw a changeup or whatever. You gotta put some pieces around it. I mean, Charlie Morton has just an elite curveball, and it took him some time to figure out which was the right fastball to put around it and how to treat that pitch. And but I do think that Max Meyer can spin it, and that is a real great place to start. So giving him two breaking balls, that seems like he could do it. He had one great breaking ball. Why can't he spin it a slightly different way? And then also giving him a sinker. The one problem is none of these things is necessarily going to fix what he can do against lefties. I mean, adding a sinker and adding a sweeper, sure, that's great, but he doesn't necessarily have a primary weapon against lefties. And maybe it'll be that hard gyro slider. But sinkers and sweepers are things you usually use against same-handed guys.
Yeah, I mean, the changeup, he threw it 18% of the time last year. I think he threw 173 changeups, 139 were thrown to lefties. So that's probably going to be a big part of it too. And I don't know, it just sounded like a full
plus though on that thing. I'm not sure. It's not a great changeup, I don't think.
That's from last
He said
year, right?
he's tweaking it.
He's been tweaking it, yeah. So it's just like you're adding stuff and you're changing what you already had, and the foundation of what you had really wasn't that bad, especially with that slider. But they bumped that slider usage up to 40% last year. So now splitting that up into 2 pitches, I think will make him a lot more effective. So I want to see it on video. I want to see how it goes as he's working.
And even when you have video, it's tough because Christopher Sanchez told us he's throwing a new pitch, and we all assumed it might probably be a cutter because he's sinker, slider, change right now, and throwing a cutter to righties might be a good way to have 2 hard pitches. And so I watched his whole outing, and I was trying to decide, are these cutters or sinkers, because it's not a great angle. Like a lot of these spring videos, not a good. And I even did this slowed one. And I was like, and I sent it to Trevor, and I was like, dude, this is a high sinker, isn't it? Because I was looking at the target, and it's just not a target you would give for a cutter. And it's hard to say. It's like, does that go down at the end? Does that go arms? Like arm side movement when the pitcher is to the left of you, know what I mean? You're just not going to see arm side movement from a lot of these angles. So we decided it was a sinker. We weren't going to show it to you. But, one thing that's nice about Sanchez is the other way you can add a new pitch, quote unquote, is he's like sitting 97. By the way, Max Meyer never touched 97 last year.
Mm-hmm. So
97.7 is the best Max all the way back to spring training of 2022.
And the thing that we get tricked by a lot of times on this side is just the short outing, right? You need to see it in the 3 and 4 inning appearances later on in the spring to know that it's real and not just max effort. I got 15 pitches, 20 pitches today, and I'm just airing it out. So that's going to be part of it for Meyer. But just a lot of things trending in the right direction, I think, as he tries to secure his role as a starter in that Miami rotation. Let's talk about the value of pitching deep into games. You found an interesting piece from Lewie Pollis that was looking at just how impactful it is when starters work deeper. I think Trevor dubbed this the Jordan Lyles effect, which I thought was a great callback.
Yeah, I mean, one of the first things he did was he's trying to make the case for leaving your starter in is the name of the piece, and it's the Lose Letter is his newsletter that he does. And the first thing that he does the first thing he shows when he shows it, you're like, first you're like, oh, that's kind of duh, but it's the beginning of the argument, which is the longer the starter goes in, the better the reliever's ERA is in that game. And you're like, if you think about it, you're like, oh yeah, duh. Yeah. You're using the back, like the good reliever, like it's the players, the 8th and 9th inning relievers, as opposed to the guy that the manager has to throw in the 5th, when things have gone poorly. But he does some fancy modeling. He was a former member of the Phillies front office as an RD analyst, and he tries to account for a lot of different things like team quality and all this stuff. And this is the big nugget he found, because he started looking at what happens in the next game and what happens over the course of the season if your starters go long. And he said, each inning a starter pitches today lowers their team's relief ERA by 7 points tomorrow.
I love that.
And that's not only about who you're starting in the game today, but it also is like this. It can be a little bit duh-ish too, but it's also like, oh wow, like, because the duh-ish part is like, okay, well, yeah, if my guy goes 7 tonight, then we only use 2 relievers, and then my third best reliever is still fresh for tomorrow.
Back-to-backs get reduced, part. Yeah. Even for
but
those 6 guys, they're not using them twice.
Yeah.
It's almost
we know this stuff. Yeah.
But quantifying it is really
like, let's change the way we're thinking about using staffs. Like, we thought, all those ERAs for relievers are lower. We're not using them enough. Let's use them a ton. And of course, what's going to happen is we're going to use them up and get them hurt and make them pitch when they're not as fresh, and the ERAs are going to go up. And so, I just thought this was a great piece, and it made me think about. I looked at starter innings pitched last year, and Seattle's number 1. That's a function of having young pitchers to some extent, but also when they acquired Luis Castillo, he has a large arsenal, multiple hard pitches, multiple soft pitches. He can go deep into games. Seattle always has a great bullpen, and it usually is pretty fresh down the stretch too. But the Royals are doing this. The Braves are third. Phillies, I think, do it with a little bit with money, like signing Zach Wheeler, re-signing Nola. They have proven veterans that can go deep. And then the Mets fifth, I think, is just perfect because that fits in what we were talking about earlier about adding multiple hard pitches. I think they look at, okay, we don't even have to spend a lot of money on the starting rotation, but we can take guys and give them an extra hard pitch, a cutter or a sinker, and we can help them go deeper into games, and that'll keep our bullpen fresher. And if you think about the Mets bullpen, it hasn't ever been really, really deep, in the last couple of years, but it has had like the Diaz and Buteau and like the very good guys at the end. So, you kind of want to keep those guys as fresh as possible. And you can do that by having starters that have multiple hard pitches go deep into games. So I just thought that was a cool little thing.
I think it's even more valuable too I think that this would be an article that I would like show if I were with the Mets, so show to Jeremy Hefner and be like, we all know this stuff. Like it's intuitive. Like we're intuitively know, like, yes, deeper into games, having your starters go deeper regularly or hitting however long, hitting their maximum innings that you want them to hit is better. But this gives like how much, like what is the effect? And that's a huge effect. That gives you a number, adds a number or gives you a number for how a bullpen might be affected over time. One interesting thing, and what I would ask, like if I were like, okay, we want to come up with an actual philosophy here and have a real like something to act on. I would say, could we figure this out based on series? Because series, like when the starter starts the series with like a 7-inning start, how does that affect reliever ERA for the rest of that series? Because a lot of the series are separated by an off day, which then kind of rolls over, resets. We call those mini off seasons in the bullpen, where everyone's fresh after that. Basically, we all look around and we say the worst thing possible is having a day where you come into the field and all the bullpen guys look at each other like, "Are you up today?" Because I'm not pitching. Yeah. I'm not pitching. You're going to pitch. So who's available? And you look and you go look at the 3 rookies. Like, oh, you guys got it today. And you just hope that you're not on the like you got a guy who's usually throwing in the 6th inning who's closing now. Like, and then there's this stress that happens. Everyone's going to have to be in situations. Everyone's going to have to be in situations where they're not usually in. You want to avoid that because that's when the snowball starts to roll down the hill.
So then you could create a rubric for making your decisions in the opening game of a series. That
if you want to keep the starter in or not, and it's trade off.
Like maybe let that starter, load the bases, or you know what I mean. Like maybe let him try and get out of it. Like maybe let him, maybe let him push, like open the 7th. You
get one more out, or like at least have that in their head, because we had this with George Kirby, right? He's like, well, I threw my 6, I thought I was done, or I threw my 5, I thought I was done, and that becomes the norm. The relievers are like, well, he's only going to throw this many, so they feel like we have to cover. There's no way. Have to, and it becomes this like thing that
Kirby has the skill set to go deep.
Exactly. He's almost like, just let me go. But like sometimes that stuff feels arbitrary, even though I understand the third time around or whatever. But like I think we can find spots. Be like, today's a great day for him to throw 7, and if we're in that position where he is in the 7th inning and things are great and he's doing what he normally does, go. So basically you just give him a little bit longer leash on that day.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yeah. And that could be I think that could be a difference maker for some of these teams that you can avoid those really tough stretches in the middle of the season where your bullpen is getting roasted, because it's just it's not just a that day problem. It's maybe a week of problems. And if you can avoid that snowball effect a little bit better, mitigate it a little bit more, I think it has a lot more value and a lot more effect on how a team's successful over a year than even maybe. I think he's just scratching the surface, but it's really interesting to me. Very interesting.
There's this weird tie-in with like how we develop pitchers in the minor leagues right now, where they're not coming up with many pitches. I've said this a million times, but like, you have like 4 pitchers who average more than 80 pitches per start in AAA. they're not building the bulk as you come through as much. I think mostly they want to protect the arms. They want to slowly ramp them up. They don't want to waste a lot of bullets in the minors. So can you develop as a starter with 80 pitches? Sure, you have to turn the lineup over. You can do that. But what happens then is if you're a major league team and you're like, okay, we've got, I don't know what a good example of this is. Oh, I know what it is. Bubba Chandler, as our fifth starter going into the season, like we should feel good about that, right? Because Bubba Chandler is one of the top 3 pitching prospects in baseball. We should just let him go. Like he's going to be why we're good. One of the reasons why we're good this year. Let's do it. Why do you go and sign Andrew Heaney for $5 million? Some people would be cynical and say, oh, to keep Bubba down longer. I would say that it's more, well, you don't know, like, first of all, how many innings Bubba can go in a start. You don't know how successful he's going to be at turning that lineup over. And it's a good way to hedge your bets, and it's a good way to maybe put everyone in position to succeed also. Like Bubba comes up when he is ready and everything's right. And it also is a good way to maybe protect your bullpen because all things equal, probably Andrew Heaney, even with not necessarily, I don't know if he's ideal for this. It's not the ideal example, but like getting a veteran who has a large arsenal who can turn it over. That's why they signed Quintana last year. He's a slightly better example because Heaney has a little bit of a smaller arsenal. But the point is these veteran guys are going to help save your bullpen too. It's not just about what it means for Bubba and what it means for your rotation. There's what it means for the whole team. And so you'll see most teams do this where every year there's like this, 1 for 10, 1 for 15, anywhere from 1 for 5 to 1 for 15 sort of bonanza of 1-year deals for veterans. And, we used to make fun of this at Fangraphs, calling it veteran presence with a TS. But these guys bring veteran presence with a CE, which can be undervalued, I think. And then also they bring like some sort of roster spackle and like maybe bullpen saving. And so I did want to ask you, Trevor, like what you've seen, in terms of veteran mentorship inside. Justin Verlander comes to camp and they're talking already about him being a mentor to these players. And this is when old Fangraphs young blogger in my basement kind of would roll my eyes and be like, he's toast and I know better than anybody and he's not helping anybody in camp. But you've got young guys like Birdsong, like there's the non-zero chance that Verlander does help Birdsong in some way. So I just wonder if you had any stories or any thoughts of when you saw that kind of mentorship really work out, or if it ever happened for you where an older player kind of opened your eyes somehow.
Yeah. Like it's definitely a real thing. And especially with there's a certain respect thing here too. Young guys come up. There's a lot of people now around clubhouses that didn't necessarily play at a really high level, so they don't have like a track record. They point, I'd be like, look, I have video proof of me figuring certain things out. That does matter. And that's not to
coaches,
take away.
Talking about coaches that didn't play, they don't.
It helps. It's helpful. If you had that would be nice that everyone had it. But I understand why. That doesn't mean that anyone doesn't know what they're talking about. It's just your ability to absorb that information and trust it is just up a little bit more because they did the thing you're trying to do. I've done the exact thing you're doing.
Mark Pryor's I also had a slider like this or whatever.
Yeah, that just kind of carries weight. Maybe makes you make the transition a little bit quicker. So these young guys with really good stuff, they come up. A guy like Justin Verlander, he speaks and you sit and you listen. You just listen to the thing he said. You're overhearing him having a conversation with someone else. You're trying to grab something because maybe he's like, oh, I thought about this pitch being like this once. And then you try, you're like, oh, wow. Little stuff like that. They've tried so many things that maybe there is something there. So you're like, I have this unique issue. Have you ever tried to solve this problem? And was there weird processes that you tried that maybe aren't in the normal zeitgeist of learning how to pitch design right now? There's that. And then there is a competitiveness thing and a leadership thing. So you just instead of feeling like you have to put pressure on yourself to do things that leaders are supposed to do, or if your team's young, you kind of just can defer. And that sometimes that's nice. It's kind of like being a backup quarterback in the NFL, and why being a backup for 3 years produces the most guys developing into the best long-term versions of themselves. And we see that's usually the best situation. The guys who have to start right away aren't great. Like that's because they have a guy they're backing up and they can watch. Like that's what you're trying to get. So, but in terms of bringing someone in just to do that, you have to still have like on the field value, and Justin Verlander very, very much so
right,
does.
because the players also be like, that guy's washed. I'm not listening to him.
Exactly, and then it goes away when they're just saying stuff, and they're just like they seem like they're just talking out of their butt. Like
right now, you're just
can't do those things anymore.
Old dude over there that thinks he knows what he's talking about.
My experience, one was Matt Belial's last year with us with the Twins. He like dropped down. He would try anything, right? So one thing with Matty B, he'll just change the way he pitched one day because he's like, I'm willing to do this in order to get guys in the big leagues. That was one thing that we all learned from Matt Belial, like how flexible you need to be in order to stick around as long as he did, because he was 40 at that time. But he was also just very, very open and honest. When he sees something, he's like, dude, that's really good. Or, dude, that doesn't look very good. Or, wow, and he was rare with that. He's just such a nice guy that he would never say, like, I don't know if that's going to work. But he'd be like, yeah, that didn't move the way I think that you think it moved. Have you tried this? And he always involved Eddie Guardado, who was our bullpen coach at the same time. So he'd always be like, Eddie, come over here. And then the two veteran guys would kind of come at you and give different. Yeah. So, like, he always brought him in, too. So that was another thing that was a veteran. And he had like no role at the end, like none. Like he was just sitting out there with us. He was a coach, well, for all intents and purposes, and he knew that. But like that was really valuable for me. Max Scherzer, he sees something and he feels really strongly about it. He's just going to tell you, which is great, and he loves watching bullpens, which was also awesome. But like him and Chris Bassett just going back and forth talking about pitching, because Chris Bassett's I have everything in the kitchen sink, and I might make a pitch up in the middle of the outing. Because that's the way I like to pitch. And so they had so much in common. They're both the most stubborn people on the planet, too. So it was really funny watching them interact. But like, I would just sit behind them. Too. Yeah. When I was done pitching, I would sit behind them, and they would sit there on the front of the fence during the Mets games and just literally just talking about pitching. They've been talking about pitching for 9 innings every single game. And then you can go and be like, what do you guys see from me? And they would just tell you. And that's just invaluable. Having those guys that you know are watching you, thinking about like, what would I do in that situation? And trying to evaluate you, just because they like that. It's just like it's a comfortability thing with having a guy on the team who feels like a coach. I think the more you need one on every team. You just do. You need someone that guys are comfortable going to and trying to learn the ropes, pitching, hitting, or just how to operate in a clubhouse with a bunch of different personalities and stuff. Like they have information on all that stuff.
I tend to see like negative sometimes from the outside. But I remember Matt Harvey was like very much broadcasting kind of like an anti-media bias in that clubhouse when he was there. That spread really quickly. And he had his own reasons for it. I think maybe he was covered
I get his his angle. Like, I mean, not that it wasn't deserved, but just like it was a pain as.
But he's like, yeah, really everyone have to write about how I was out late last night.
Yeah, leave me alone.
Yeah, leave me alone. I also think sometimes of like Adam Wainwright, just like not really digging technology at all, and how that became sort of pervasive in the Cardinals organization to the point where they're now kind of years behind and have to play catch up. And it's not Adam Wainwright's fault. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that to some extent, if you're like, say you're a young guy coming up and there is maybe an assistant pitching coach that's like, hey, like, I know you want to do this, but like, could we try, like, how about if your slider had lift instead of drop? I'm not even going to say the word sweeper because I know Adam might be around the corner.
Yeah.
But that's he's like,
real.
That's real. What if your slider didn't have as much drop and you actually made it more sideways? And then like you start bringing out the Edgertronic, and Adam's like, "What's that?" That's not good. So, those are just some negative examples, but they matter a little bit. And one thing that I can say for Verlander is, he's been pro tech for a long time. And I think he's worked with some of the best pitching coaches out there. And I think he'd be more likely to bring the coach in almost in like the Eddie Guardado way, where he's going to be like, not trying to be the pitching coach, but trying to be like, this is how I think about it, and you should talk to your coach because they probably know well too. They have your numbers. I don't necessarily have your numbers in front of me, but you know what I mean? So
Yeah,
like,
let's just see a JV sinker. How about that? I just want to see him throw a sinker this year, though. Like Lee
I
Bikes.
do kind of want him to throw a sinker. I wonder if he would pull that trick at 40.
Yeah.
Still has to be his idea, though, right? Generally,
It might be.
Even if he's good at providing some mentorship to younger pitchers, getting in the ear of Verlander and getting him to try something seems like that's still very difficult.
It could be. I mean, he's in that Scherzer Bassett like opinionated, and he's earned his right to be opinionated with a long track record of success.
You're going to go to the Hall of Fame. I think you can continue doing things your way. That's probably fine. As far as this year's large batch of guys that signed 1-year deals, Verlander, Scherzer among them, Walker Buehler. We'll count Nick Martinez. He took the qualifying offer. Charlie Morton, Alex Cobb, lot of veterans in new places. You mentioned Heaney before, guys like Griffin Canning and Cal Quantrill, Kyle Hendricks, whole bunch of guys to choose from. Who's your favorite 1-year pitcher deal for 2025 that you think is going to be making a big impact, either just directly because they're going to pitch well, or at least going to help make other guys around them better?
Mine's Charlie Morton.
Yeah.
Because I think his stuff's still good. I think that the only thing that we've seen in the last couple of years maybe is the command start to get a little erratic at times, and that's just, he's a kind of a swingy side to side kind of motion type guy, and sometimes you get a little out of whack. And Ottavino talked about this too. He's like, you get older and you're a big guy. It's just one of the things that happens. But all movement profile and everything good, and he's just healthy. He makes 30 starts every year, and the Orioles need that so badly. They just need a guy that's going to pitch 30 starts this year. They need one, and they're in danger of not having anybody that does that. So I just think value to his team, being the veteran presence. We saw like when they had Cal Gibson, he was a nice veteran presence they had, and James McCann there. Those were two good guys they had on their team for a lot of young guys that they loved, that they all bought into. I think Morton's one of those guys. He just loves pitching, loves talking about pitching. You ask him a question, he can answer a question for 10 minutes about it. It's awesome, and I think that he's going to add a lot to the young stacks. Even the guys coming back off injury, like they're all going to just cluster around him. So I like him for them.
Yeah, and he's like one of the most thoughtful interviews I've ever had, and he's in temperament very different from Scherzer and Verlander, but and he's very pro tech too, and I feel like he will broadcast the right things, and I think he does care about going deep into games, and that's something that. Bradish and Grayson Rodriguez, I think if they add that component to their games where they're like, this might be a suboptimal pitch for right now, but it is going to set me up to go into the 6th inning easier, that sort of deal. I think they can learn a lot from that. Grayson Rodriguez in particular is not the type of pitcher that Morton is. I mean, he's a pronator. He's more of a fastball changeup guy, but I would love it if they just, had a bus ride together. I think that there would be a lot for Grayson to learn there. And I, as much as Max Scherzer, doesn't agree with me on a lot of things, I think that, landing in Toronto is good for a couple reasons. I like him. I think he still has something left. I think the back injury just robbed him of some slider command in a way. If you look at the stuff numbers, they're still pretty good. And the velo was all right. And he just couldn't command the slider. And I feel like that's something that could happen with the back. I don't know. It's a little bit like what you're saying with Morton. A lot of the stuff and a lot of the shapes are okay and everything's there. It's just he couldn't command it with the back feeling bad. And I also think he's like a bulldog, and that could help maybe Bowden Francis a little bit as he has to transition from like a pitcher that no one knows anything about to a pitcher that everyone has a scouting report on and everyone's ready for. Some of that kind of bulldog, you belong here, you're here to dominate, that sort of feeling. So Scherzer could help in a couple of different ways, but I just think he has stuff left.
Yeah,
And he's back with Bassett. Got to throw it out there. Him and Chris
That's
Bassett.
right. Yeah, back with Bassett. Epic
That's why he went there.
conversations.
That's why he went there. I liked the Verlander signing for the reasons we've talked about. And it's nice to hear and see stories about him providing that presence, aside from the fact that I do think he still has something left in the tank. He's one of those guys. They're going to have to drag him off the mound when he's going to be.
So he wants to pitch to 45.
I mean, hey, I'm not going to tell him he can't. If you guys want to, go ahead. But that's not for me. We are going to go on our way out the door. Reminder, you can find us on Bluesky. Trevor is I am Trevor May. .bsky.social. Eno is Sarris. .bsky.social. I'm DVR. Thanks to our producer, Brian Smith, for putting this episode together. If you need to get a subscription to The Athletic, theathletic.com/rates and barrels. We'll get that for you. That is going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We're back with you on Friday.
Thanks for listening.